Good evening, and welcome to our virtual production of It's Been a While. To begin, let us acknowledge that the land on which this play is being performed is situated on traditional Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territory. To acknowledge this traditional territory is to recognize its longer history, one predating the establishment of the earliest European colonies. It is also to acknowledge this territory's significance for the indigenous peoples who lived on and continue to live upon it, and whose practices and spiritualities were tied to the land and continue to develop in relation to the territory and its other inhabitants today. This is a play about friendship and politics, and it asks whether or not certain friendships can be maintained during these hyper-partisan times. This play also considers what drives certain people to support far-right populist politicians like Donald Trump. As you will notice, the play takes place prior to the 2020 election. This is a conversation that would have taken place this past summer, in the midst of a global pandemic, and on the eve of one of the most consequential elections in modern history. Even though the election is over, and America is set to have a new president in the White House come January, the divisions explored in this piece are not going anywhere. The environment that created Trumpism is not going to disappear when Joe Biden takes the oath of office. In fact, it is likely these divisions will actually get worse in the coming years. So, I invite you now to join us on this virtual journey. At the end of our play, we encourage you to stick around for a live Q&A. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them in the chat on YouTube or on our Facebook event page. Enjoy It's Been a While. The time is September 2020. The setting is New York City and Athens, Ohio.
Fred, are you there? Fred, I can't hear you. I think you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's much better.
Well, it's so great to see you.
Yes, I'm so glad we could do this. Well, it's been ages.
You know, I can't remember the last time we spoke.
Me neither. It has to have been years.
Definitely.
Oh, I think the last time I saw you was after my mother passed away.
Yeah, that's right. How long ago was that?
Well, she died in 2005, so 15 years.
Oh my God, it hasn't been that long, has it?
Well, I guess it has.
I suppose life just gets in the way and you lose track of time.
Exactly. It feels like this is the first break I've had in ages.
Oh yeah? Well, from what I've seen on Facebook, work and family seem to be keeping you pretty busy.
Oh, they have. I mean, between the magazine, getting the kids off to college, and Jeff's projects, we haven't had a chance to catch our breath.
Remind me, what does your husband do for a living?
Well, he's a television producer, one of the best in New York. But the pilot he spent the last 2 years developing has just fallen through, so he's looking for something else right now.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah, well, it happens.
It's the nature of the business, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm sure he'll have something again in no time.
What sorts of shows does he produce?
Well, mostly sitcoms. The project he was working on was sort of a comedy drama mix. What about yourself? How are things?
Well, I can't complain, all things considered. It's been really quiet here since the pandemic started. I'm just spending lots of time with the family and working on projects around the house.
Oh, that's nice. How is everyone?
Well, everyone's hanging in there. We actually had 2 of the kids come and stay with us in the spring. Now it's just Lisa and I, but we look after our granddaughter almost every day.
You're a grandfather? Fred, where have you gone, Fred? There you are. So you're a grandfather?
Yeah, my son Adam had a baby girl last year. She's the cutest little thing.
Well, congratulations. You know, I forgot that you and Lisa had kids.
Yeah, well, you know, I honestly never planned on being a father. Jenny and I were married. We tried a few times, but it just never worked out. We couldn't afford that IVF stuff. So we just forgot about that dream. And then when I met Lisa, well, she was a bit younger and she wanted kids. So here I am.
Well, I'm happy for you.
Thanks. What about you? You have 2 daughters, right?
Oh, yes, sir. Sarah, my oldest, she just turned 30. She's working as a nurse up in Albany. And Jessica, she's 25, just got her master's at NYU. Well, she's actually been living with us since March.
Hmm. How are you finding that? We loved having the kids with us at first, but after a while, we got on each nerves pretty quickly.
It, it was an adjustment at first. It's just been Jeff and I here for a few years. And while the girls visit regularly, we haven't had anyone living with us for years.
Is that just a temporary thing or what?
I'm not sure yet. After Jess finishes her master's, well, she was planning on going to South America to teach English, but of course, that whole plan fell apart. I think she wants to stay in New York, but I don't know how unless she gets a proper job. The rent is just so high, and Jeff and I can't support her forever.
To be honest with you, June, I'm surprised that you stayed in New York. From what I've heard, it's filled with criminals these days.
Oh, nonsense. I try not to listen to all that negativity. Well, there are certain people in this world who just aren't happy unless they're complaining about something.
Yeah, well, what about all the murders and the gangs? Aren't you scared?
When I read about people being afraid to live in New York, well, I give my head a shake. We've lived on the same street for 15 years and we've never had a problem. Well, yes, sometimes there's crime in the city, but it's the same thing everywhere you go. Honestly, Fred, the only time I've ever been robbed was back in Ohio.
I suppose. But here in Athens is the only place that I've ever felt safe.
Well, it's not as if you do a lot of traveling, do you?
I haven't been on a vacation since Lisa and I took the kids to Disney World 15 years ago.
Well, there you go. How can you possibly say that Athens, Ohio is the only safe place if you don't go anywhere?
Yeah, I go places. Just a few weeks ago, I had to go to Cleveland to pick up some orders for the store, and my wallet was stolen.
Are you sure you didn't just lose it?
That's what Lisa said. I don't know.
Jesus, Fred, you haven't changed a bit.
Just what's that supposed to mean?
Well, back in high school, you were always accusing people of stealing things, like your lunch money, and then you'd find it 3 days later.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, is the old school still there? Last I heard, they were planning to tear it down and move all the kids to a big new school in Lincoln.
Yeah, they wanted to do that. It's an old building and people don't have as many kids as they used to. But I guess they didn't have the money to build a new school big enough to serve the students from both towns. So now the kids here are stuck with a 70-year-old building that's been falling apart for 20 years.
Oh, that's too bad. We sure had some good times then, back in those years.
Absolutely.
Do you remember senior year when a bunch of us covered this whole science lab in tinfoil?
Of course I do. Who do you think took the blame for that?
Oh, to be 18 again.
Did you miss it?
Sometimes I do. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love my life, but sometimes I really envy my youngest. It would just be great not to have to worry about anything.
Yeah, but isn't she worrying? Don't you think she'd rather be out on her own than shacking up with mom and dad?
Oh, that's different. She's only living with us because her 6-month trip to Brazil got canceled, which we were paying for, might I add. These kids just don't know how lucky they are to have nothing to worry about but themselves.
I guess I understand.
I think my girls would be shocked if they saw how I grew up.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, absolutely. By no means were we poor, but we lived very modestly. We only ever got things from our parents at Christmas. If I wanted new clothes or anything else, I had to get a job and earn the money to pay for things myself.
That's right. All those summers we spent working at the tire factory, we made good money.
Yeah, I only ever had to work 3 months a year. I had enough to get by in between summers.
Did your kids have jobs when they were in high school?
Well, not really. I mean, they both did summer internships at Jeff's studio, but I wouldn't really call those jobs. I guess they just never felt the need to.
Guess they're just lucky to have the two of you as parents.
You wish I could get them in on the call to hear you say that.
Do you find that you've tried to be the exact opposite of your parents when you're raising your own kids?
Absolutely. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love my parents deeply, but I think I grew to resent the fact that we didn't have much money growing up. I wanted my kids to experience things I never could. I wanted them to go to the best schools, see the world, you know?
Yeah, I get it. I guess I just never wanted my kids to feel stuck. I wanted them to know that if they put their mind to it and they worked really hard, that anything was possible. I wanted them to be able to go to college if they wanted to. I just didn't want them feeling like they had to stay here their whole lives.
Well, do you think you were successful?
I guess. I mean, the boys both went to college. Aside from 4 years in Columbus, they've never really shown any desire for a life beyond this town.
How do they feel about that?
I don't know.
Hmm.
Maybe I'm projecting, but I think that if I had the education that they have, I'd be out there trying to make something of my life.
Well, I'm sure they're happy. All you can do is give them as many opportunities as possible and let them figure things out for themselves. Besides, it's a good thing Adam's still there. You get to see that new granddaughter of yours.
Yeah, you're right about that. I mean, I I just don't want them living with the sorts of regrets that I have.
Well, what do you regret? I know you wanted to go to college, but you had your reasons as to why you stayed.
Yeah, I don't. I know, but I just feel like after my dad got better, maybe I should have forced myself to take a chance.
Hmm.
But I got comfortable, and 47 years later, here I am.
Is there something you wanted to do that you never got the opportunity to?
Uh, I don't know. I always dreamed of moving to Maine and starting my own fishing crew.
I remember that. That's all you ever talked about growing up. Hey, it's never too late.
Oh, give me a break. I'm 65 years old, not exactly the prime age for something like that.
No, I suppose not. So, what exactly did you end up doing?
Well, I never left the plant. I worked my way up from intern to the assistant plant manager.
Oh,
I gave 40 years of my life to them until they shut it down 7 years ago.
well, that's too bad.
Yeah, and we lost our pensions because of the bankruptcy. We're still fighting that in court. Probably
That's
never see
right.
a penny from those bastards.
Oh, I heard about that. I'm so sorry, Fred. What are you doing now?
Oh, I spent a few years looking for odd jobs, did some construction work, did a house painting, just whatever I could find to keep the bills paid.
Mhm.
Then a few years ago, they opened a Home Depot and I applied and they hired me as a manager right on the spot.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, it's not too bad. Pays good. That's what really matters. Between that and what Lisa brings up working reception at the health center, well, we do okay.
I can't believe you guys just got a Home Depot.
Well, we weren't exactly getting anything new here since the recession. Half of Main Street's been boarded up since '09.
Mm,
But that's starting to change now. We're starting to get a few big box stores moving in. It's nice, but it really kills those mom and pop shops. There's no small businesses here anymore.
I feel like that's the new normal now, especially with the pandemic. I don't know how those small businesses are surviving. We've been getting takeout a couple of times a week from our favorite restaurants, just trying to do whatever we can to support them.
Oh, well, that's great. And you're right. It's those places that need our support right now. But I think things are a bit different here than in New York.
Well, how so?
Well, it's just that there's so many people there, and most of them are well off. They can afford to support the restaurants and the shops. Here, people are too worried about paying their bills. They can't afford takeout a couple of times a week.
Oh, I guess you're right. The government needs to step in and do something.
They're trying, though. We have to get people back to work. These COVID restrictions are killing our economy.
People can't go back to work until it's safe to do so.
That's why we need a vaccine and fast.
Well, that's going to take ages. We need some economic aid in the meantime.
I'm not so sure about that. I think we need to do whatever we can to get people back to work. All these benefits, it's just giving people an incentive to stay home.
But Fred, so many people can't go into work, whether it's because they have pre-existing conditions or they're looking after loved ones. They can't take that risk. They need some help from their government in the meantime.
Well, those people should get some help. I agree with that. But we're giving everyone a check. People would much rather sit at home eating Cheetos than go out and look for work.
I think you're being a bit too cynical. I'm not sure that's what people are doing.
June, you'd be surprised. The level of incompetence these days is astonishing.
All right. I just can't wait for this all to be over.
You and me both.
And we can finally have a president again.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I'm just saying, once Biden's in office, we're actually going to get some leadership for once.
I hate to break it to you, June, but I don't think we see eye to eye where the president's concerned.
Well, what do you mean? You're not voting for Trump, are you?
Well,
Fred,
what can I say? I like the guy.
but he's awful.
I don't know. He's done a lot of work to make America great again.
Like what? What about any of this is great?
Well, he's delivered on his promises. Before COVID, the economy was healthy, the markets were strong, and he was draining that swamp.
But everything he stands for. How can you support someone who has a complete disregard for anyone but himself?
I never said I liked him as a person. To be honest, I think he's a real jerk. But as a president, I like him.
But what about COVID, though? 200,000 people are dead because of him.
Those people would have been dead regardless of who we had as president.
How? He's tried to downplay the virus at every turn. He took months to acknowledge that it was a serious health crisis, and he still won't wear a mask.
I know he's not perfect, but he's doing the best possible job that he can.
I really don't know how you can say that. With everything that's out there, how can you possibly say he's done the best job he could? He spent months trying to downplay the seriousness of it all, and by the time he realized he was wrong, there were already thousands of deaths.
Look, I know you work for a magazine and all, but you really shouldn't trust everything that you read.
Don't tell me you believe in fake news.
I'm just saying that sometimes the media likes only to report on what helps the Democrats. The media never took sides before, but now all they do is tear down the president.
And don't you think that's warranted? Don't you think he shot himself in the foot?
Well, a bit of criticism from time to time is perfectly normal. But when all they do is trash him, you start to tune out.
Okay, well then, what news do you trust? Fox?
Nah, not at all. I have just as much trouble when the right tries to pull all that crap. I just can't stand it. When all we do is fight with each other. We're missing out on the important issues, like making sure that people are looked after.
I agree. I just don't see how he's the man you think will make sure people are looked after.
Look, June, I don't know what it's been like in New York City these last 15 years, but things have been pretty bad here. Businesses are shutting down. People are losing their jobs and being forced out of their homes. The recession hit us hard, and it's been taking a long time for us to get back on our feet. These last couple of years, things have been different. It just feels, I don't know, refreshing to have a president who's no bullshit and tells it like it is. I know he's this big New York millionaire, but to so many of us out here, he just feels like he's one of us.
I'm sorry, Fred. I just can't believe you're saying all this. I had no idea you liked Trump.
Well, I don't go around blasting my politics all over Facebook. Quite frankly, it's nobody's business who I support. But since you asked, I don't mind telling you that I voted for him before, and I'm voting for him again. And look, I certainly don't agree with everything he says. I just think that where important things are concerned, he gets the job done.
But those people who support him, you're nothing like them.
You're right. I'm not like those people. There are many people who support the president, who don't feel inclined to wear red hats and shout it from the rooftops.
Are you telling me that you agree with what he's doing? All this racial unrest, kids in cages, tearing away women's rights?
Like I said, I don't agree with everything that he's done. But to be completely honest with you, given how bad things have been around here, I really have to vote for whomever is going to make life easier for me and my family.
Okay, well then what about healthcare or taxes?
Ugh, I don't understand what you people think is so good about Obamacare. Took us ages to get enrolled, and the coverage was nowhere near what I now get on my work plan.
But what about people who don't have coverage through work? What did you do before Home Depot opened?
He's not trying to eradicate Medicare, but the system that Obama put in place was a complete mess.
What exactly was the problem? I mean, yes, it took a while to get people enrolled, but once those kinks were worked out, people who had no coverage before were able to get health care.
Yeah, but I shouldn't have to give up my own private insurance when I work hard for that quality coverage.
But Fred, people shouldn't have to work hard to access better healthcare services. Don't you think everyone should have access, regardless of your level of income or any pre-existing conditions?
Look, all I know is that I like the coverage I get through work. And I'll be damned if I'm just going to cough that up for socialist medicine.
My God, Fred, listen to yourself.
We've had a really hard time these last few years. I'm sorry. I'm just a little tired of all the left-wing talking points. You know, for the first time in a long time, I feel listened to by my president. And I know a lot of people around here, they feel the same way. After the recession, when things started closing down, this town lost its soul.
Well, you can't blame Obama for that. He inherited that economic disaster from Bush.
I know. That's why I voted for Obama. I really felt like he was going to make a difference. But after 8 years, we were worse off than when he started. For years, I watched as politicians march through Ohio, giving the same talking points about bringing back jobs and helping rebuild our towns. And once they get into office, they just forget about us. All they cared about was saying whatever they needed to say in order to get elected. But with Trump, I mean, things feel different. Because people care about our communities. They care about getting us back to work and bringing this town back to life.
You need to understand that for a lot of communities, especially Black and Latino communities, they do not feel the same way. Not at all. He's trying to start a race war, for Christ's sake.
I know that. Believe me, I understand that there's division in this country, but I just don't think that the solution for any of this is a return to the political establishment. We need politicians who aren't afraid to speak their minds, stand up for what they believe in.
I'm sorry, Fred, but I just think you're being so misled. If you just open your eyes for a minute, you'd see that America it's hurting right now. We're more divided than we've ever been, and the president is to blame for all this.
Well, that's the problem right there.
Well, what?
You think this is all his doing. You think that it's because of Trump that America's divided. Well, let me tell you something. We were divided long before this president came along. It'll be the same once he's gone. This all started when people stopped giving a damn about everyday Americans.
I just don't know what to say anymore. I thought we felt the same way about things.
But we do. At the end of the day, don't we all want the same thing?
You know, I used to think that, but these last 4 years have taught me that that is definitely no longer the case. There is a vocal group of people in this country that do not care about anyone other than themselves. And as far as I'm concerned, the president is at the top of that list.
I just think you're being too hard on him, but you're entitled to your opinion.
Damn right I'm being hard on him. When you're the president, you have to be held to a higher standard than anyone else. I just think he has done so much damage to the country, and I don't really get how you can't see that.
Well, like I said, I know he's not perfect. But at the end of the day, I really have to look out for what's best for myself and my family. As far as I'm concerned, we're better off with him than with anybody else.
Would you say that most people back at home feel the same way?
Well, I can't speak for anyone else's voting behavior, but I can tell you a lot of people who felt forgotten for so long are starting to feel heard. You might not like what they say, but at least they're being heard.
I'm just so surprised that you feel this way. I don't know how you can say what you're saying about what you want for your town or the country and think that this man is the one who will provide that for you. I can't believe we're so far apart on this.
But we're not, June. We just feel a bit differently about the direction that we want our country to head.
I'm sorry, but as far as I'm concerned, what I want and what Trump wants are two polar opposites. So if you're telling me that you support what he's trying to do, then what does that say about our friendship? Well, I better get going.
Oh, don't hang up just because things got a little political. It's been really nice chatting with you.
No, I just have some stuff I've got to do.
All right. I hope we talk later.
Goodbye, Fred.
Goodbye.
Great job. Congratulations. That went really well, guys. Thank you. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to invite the actors to come back onto the Zoom call and people to stick around. And we're going to do a bit of a live Q&A after the show. So if you have any questions or comments about the content of the piece, the political nature, feel free to leave a question on YouTube or on Facebook, and I will do my best to sort of facilitate a bit of a discussion. So let's get started. I've got a question that I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say. One of the things that I focused on a lot in this show is location. The two states, Ohio, New York. I'm curious what you two think on the importance of the location of your character in terms of shaping their political beliefs. Cindy, your character June grew up in the same town as Fred, Athens, Ohio, but you have since moved away to New York. How do you think that experience in New York has shaped that those political beliefs?
I would assume that for someone who has left the small town, moved into a much bigger urban center, like New York City, and the work that I'm doing and the fact that my husband's a television producer, we would be surrounded with peers that would have very different political agendas and political beliefs and experiences than the people that are still in Athens, Ohio. So even though my initial upbringing would have lent me to perhaps have some of the opinions that Fred has, the fact that my life has completely changed and I now have very little contact. The fact that I hadn't even seen Fred for 15 years and I didn't know what people thought back in Ohio, and I don't know about the school. I've clearly not kept in contact with those people. So I've pretty much left most of that thinking behind, I would say.
Right. Now, John, you have the opposite experience. Your character really never leaves that town and is clearly shaped by his experience in the working class, blue collar community, is shaped by a very different hometown feel of what's going on in your town compared to New York. How do you think that shaped your experience?
Well, I think it's really interesting that we started actually working on this a little bit before the election. And then when the election did happen, Ohio switched over. It is now a red state, right? So it's obvious that you sort of read the feel of Ohio well even before the election, because people there basically are more worried about what's happening with themselves, perhaps, and their families. I mean, that's natural too. If you're a working class person and your town's sort of shut down and you feel like things aren't really going very well, you're going to try and find whatever it is that will help bring that back. And Trump's rhetoric is pretty much, I'm going to do this, open up, help the economy and all that kind of thing. And it's just obvious that Ohio as a state actually went that way. At one point, I think they talked about the state being purple because there was sort of equal amounts, right? But it's pretty red now. So
yeah, I think that it's one of those swing states that they talk about. Fred mentions the politicians come through the state every election cycle. That's something that Ohio is often put on that map. And I think what Trump was able to do was appeal to those working class, blue collar attitudes, maybe obviously more so than Biden did, at least in Ohio. There were other states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin that didn't necessarily have that change. They didn't go. Trump, I think, won like Michigan and Pennsylvania in the last election, but they didn't switch this time. So I think maybe there is something unique even in Ohio. I know Athens, the reason I chose that town is it has like one of the lowest salaries of any county in the entire state. So it's a real location for where they feel that economic hit since the recession in 08. And I can only imagine it's getting worse now. And that feeling, maybe even some rebuilding was happening over the last couple of years, but I can only imagine things feel even worse right now, wondering how are they going to get out of this pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a first question from YouTube, and asks, I wonder how Fred would feel about what's going on right now after the election. So I think we get this indication that Fred doesn't necessarily like everything Trump stands for. He probably doesn't even really like Trump as a person. It's just some of his policies, economically especially, have been beneficial to Fred and his town. So, John, do you think how would Fred view Trump's behavior right now? Do you think he's sort of of the opinion, like, let's just get on with it, this transition, or?
No, I think he'd be kind of upset in a way because Fred doesn't like everything that Trump says, and he says like he thinks he's a bit of a jerk, and that it's his policy that he wants, and it's more that other Trump thing. He's very much aware of the sort of racial divide and all the other things that are going on. So I think that the interesting thing about Fred is he isn't what we kind of think stereotypically as the sort of redneck gun-toting Trump supporter who's waving a flag and not thinking. I think this guy actually thinks a fair bit about it, and he's made a decision to vote for Trump based on the fact that he thinks that that's what's going to happen, that the economy will be better and with a Trump administration. And so I think he'd be sort of torn at the moment. I kind of feel like he would probably be the kind of guy that would say, well, it looks like Biden won, and we'll just have, we'll sort of, grit our teeth and bear it, and maybe we'll have to sort of work towards something else next time. Yeah. I don't think he'd be supportive of all of this sort of nonsense that's going on now.
Yeah, I think you're seeing like a lot of those moderate Republicans are kind of starting to say, let's give Biden the transition that he needs just to get on with it. I mean, especially where the pandemic is concerned, there were some doctors that came out the other day saying if there's not a seamless transition, a lot more people are going to die from COVID than we're already going to have if there's that peaceful transition. Like, this transition is key to ensuring the virus is handled. Cindy, I'm wondering your character, like obviously a very different understanding of Trump, but a clear opposition to Trumpism. How do you think June would be feeling right now with Trump refusing to concede? And do you think she would have been watching the election very closely?
I think my impression of June, and this is partly because I'm so shocked that Fred feels the way he feels. It never occurred to me that anyone who I would remotely have a friendship with would ever have that kind of an opinion. So I think my social circle and my entire, everyone that I surround myself with are very anti-Trump for all the reasons that she talks about. So I would be disgusted, I think, with Trump's behavior, but not surprised. And I think everything that he is doing now would simply reinforce my opinions of him as a person, probably more than as a politician, because I'm just as offended by his personality and the way he comes across as a man as I am as the way he appears as a president. Like, everything about him is just awful. I can't even come up with a word other than saying he's just awful. And that's, everything about him is awful.
Yeah.
It's sort of what you said there. I've had fun trying to get into Fred's head, because we just assumed that everybody would think that he's awful. I mean, when you said it, like if June's living in New York and she's surrounded herself the same as I'm surrounded by people here who think, oh, Trump's crazy and ridiculous and we can hardly wait to get rid of him. There are a lot of people who are like Fred, obviously, and have reason don't agree with a lot of stuff that he's done, but still are supportive. And it's interesting. I find myself unable to believe that anybody would vote for him, let alone 70 million Americans. So it's a bit of a wake-up call to be Fred and have this thought that
Yeah, that's something that I'm seeing in the comments. A lot of people seem to appreciate the rationality of a character like Fred. Someone says, I like that Fred's character was quite rational. It was smart to have someone who was just disenfranchised and not a crazy Republican. Another person saying it's not as if the 70 million people who voted for Trump are MAGA maniacs. John, I'm wondering if portraying this character, has it shifted your perception of some of those 70 million people? Like, has it taught you anything about Trump supporters at all?
Yeah, well, I think it has. I mean, I think it's given me a little better insight how some people would be thinking. And once again, I think we just, I don't know, a month ago, I would have been thinking, oh, anybody, how could anybody ever vote for Trump? Like Biden's going to just wipe the whole place. I mean, there must be lots of Americans, or so many Americans that are just going to try and get rid of him. And then it didn't happen. And it's because of people like Fred, probably, really. Yeah. So yeah, I've actually enjoyed it. The other thing that I find interesting is that of the two, of June and Fred, June is the least tolerant, really, of the other side. And I've become aware that I'm probably not too tolerant of the other side. John isn't too tolerant of the other side, So you have to sort of think about that.
But there are things, I think, like with Cindy's character, with June, I think there are certain issues that whereas Fred isn't necessarily saying things like all lives matter. I think for a character like June, there certainly would be areas that are deal breakers, right, Cindy? Like maybe are more willing to talk to Fred because he is a bit rational, but even that, just the thought of voting for Trump and supporting things that Trump stands for could be a big deal breaker in terms of friendship.
Yeah. And one of the areas that I struggled with for June, I mean, the first time I read through it, I was like, oh man, she's right on. I totally identify with her. She's exactly how I would be. And then I started to feel some things that I didn't really like, because I thought it's easy for June, who is not suffering financially. Life's busy and all this stuff, but it's all very her causes and her whatever. So it's easy for her to be idealistic and to really focus in on the things that Trump does that are a bit removed from the economic platforms and into the racial stuff and all of that, because those are my causes and those are the things that matter to me. But I mean, if you just think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Fred is worrying about feeding his family and paying his bills. June's way beyond that. She's able to, not even think about that stuff. And then, it's easy to look down on the people in Athens, Ohio for their political beliefs.
Yeah.
Having said that, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's also important to understand, though, that there are a lot of people who would be in a similar economic situation as Fred, but they are not white. And like for Black people, Latinos who are constantly being marginalized by Trump's policies, they likely wouldn't feel the same way about someone like Donald Trump that Fred does, even though maybe there's that economic standpoint. And yes, there were Latino groups that did show up in droves for Donald Trump in some states. But it's important to understand that some of what Trump stands for can be ignored if you don't experience that racism necessarily, or just that life experience.
Yeah.
So Someone asked a question that's a bit different than what we've been talking about, but I think it's a really interesting question. One of the points that Fred talks about is Trump being anti-establishment. And he likes the fact that Trump is very different than any other politician he's seen. So someone asked, how would Fred react had the Democrats selected a ticket that wasn't establishment, but actually here's the problems of the Rust Belt, like a Bernie Sanders? So, I mean, there is a bit of a talk sometimes about there being similarities between Bernie Sanders supporters and Trump supporters, both standing for non-traditional establishment policies. I'll start with John. John, do you think that Fred would have been more open to Bernie Sanders as opposed to Biden, or do you think he would have stayed?
I don't know, because he's pretty anti-socialist sort of stuff.
Right.
So I think he would see Bernie Sanders. I mean, I think he would kind of like Bernie Sanders on one level, but also would think he's not practical enough. He's got too many, idealistic things. So Bernie isn't sort of an economist kind of, or doesn't sort of strike me anyway as somebody who's going to fix the economy. He's going to fix healthcare and the climate change and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I don't think he'd go for, and I'm thinking about I wonder whether Amy Klobuchar might be somebody that he would appeal to him better. I'm trying to think of somebody. I don't think he'd go for Buttigieg. Also just he wouldn't go for the academic, people who seem to be, really good on theory, but not too good, or, not too sure on practice. So and in some ways, I think he would sort of think Joe Biden is not a bad second, because Joe's pretty moderate, right?
Yeah.
Like he's sort of along the middle. So I mean,
he can live with Biden, and he's also not a lifelong Republican either.
No, that's right. He voted for Obama. So yeah, that's right. I mean, that makes it a bit different too, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. So another thing that's come up a bit is this notion of using conversation to change minds. Like, do you think, and I think maybe it would be more a case for June, but do either of you think that the conversation your characters, would either of them left this conversation and had something really to think about, or do you think they'd be hardened in their own beliefs? Cindy?
I think June is initially annoyed with Fred, and she's shocked. She can't believe what she's hearing coming out of his mouth when she says, "My God, Fred, listen to yourself." Right? She just can't believe that he's just focused on his own needs and not being more community minded and altruistic and all of those things. So I think she leaves the call, but she thinks about it. Okay. She goes to bed that night and she's thinking about this as an old friend and why are we so different now? And I think she'll examine whether or not she can put some of this aside and continue to have the friendship without involving any of the politics. But I think she would find it difficult.
Yeah.
I do. I think because as long as anything is happening in the country, there's going to be different sides and different opinions. And I think her and Fred may find themselves on those two opposite sides on many issues.
Yeah.
I mean, they haven't been in touch for 15 years. So.
Right. Yeah. Do you think, John, I feel like with a character like Fred, you probably have interaction with both sides of the aisle. Do you think that this is the kind of experience, like June, as Cindy says, is a bit annoyed at the beginning, and it seems like it's almost a challenge, like how could you vote for someone like him? Like how could you possibly do that? Do you think that this is a interaction Fred has had before with other people? Do you think he minds it at all? Like how do you think he feels about it?
I think Fred knows that the left-wing people, like he's found that June is, or whatever, are not tolerant of the people who support Trump. And I think he leaves this conversation feeling kind of hurt and disappointed because I mean, he keeps saying, look, we do want the same thing. We've just got different political beliefs. He would like to actually be able to be more like, let's have a discussion and talk about it. And I can have this is what I'm thinking, and you can think what you are, but let me give me your expression. Like, let me tell you what I'm thinking. Whereas June kind of shuts it down. Like, she's pretty much like, this is it. So I really like that about the Fred character, is that I think he's more sort of tolerant and open to discussion. And I think he leaves this feeling really kind of disappointed, but he didn't know how June was going to be, but he's heard this before from people. And, it's discouraging, because I think he kind of knows that he's not a bad guy and he's got reasons to vote. And, so, don't judge me all on the one thing, June.
Yeah.
I think it's I think it's easy for Fred's character to feel that way. But I think for someone like June, there are absolutes. And when it comes to things like women's rights and Black Lives Matter and kids in cages,
Yep.
if you're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution. And
Yep.
if you're not part of the solution, then I'm sorry.
Yep. And there's certainly, something to make of the argument that by voting for Trump, you are in a way legitimizing those practices. Whether or not to you there are issues that exceed in importance those things, like the economy, putting food on your table, that's very critical for a lot of people. But some may say that just by the simple act of voting for Trump, you are giving him the approval of doing those horrible things.
And it translates through to the rest of the country.
Yeah.
So what education does June have? Like, I mean, did
Right.
June go off to college or university or something?
I would have imagined she
Fred
does
just
have
spent
a
his
college
time-
education.
Sorry? You
I think she does have a college education.
Yeah, well, Fred doesn't. He went from working summers at the tire factory to being an intern, and gradually worked his way up through the thing. So he's really not educated.
Right.
And so he hasn't had the option of really exploring a lot of that stuff from a different level. He's been pretty restricted in his sort of life experience and education. So, it's hard for him to really understand things, maybe on a little broader level. Maybe that's being judgmental, but
Fred, a lot of credit there.
But going back to like something we talked about at the beginning, I think a lot of that too is shaped by, like, in New York City, it's this multicultural capital of the world. June is probably interacting with a far wider range of, backgrounds and people than Fred. And she's probably more sympathetic to some of the plights of things like Black Lives Matter, or what's going on at the US-Mexico border, or things like the environment and stuff like that. Like, she's probably more, it's something that she probably interacts with more on a daily basis. Whereas, people in Fred's community are primarily focused on the economy, making sure that they have jobs, safety, and security, and putting food on their table. That's key for them.
And I wouldn't be surprised if Fred sees the racial tensions as being somewhere separate, that he probably doesn't have any people of color as friends, really, or that he hangs out with. And I think he's empathetic, but I don't think he kind of gets it, because he's probably just never exposed to it. So if you're not exposed to some of that stuff, it's hard to understand it. Maybe, it's distant. You see it on the news, but hey, it's not happening here.
We know Fred shows sort of a hesitancy to treat the news as important or as the whole truth. He's critical of the bias that the media sometimes holds, whether that's accurate or not. He's maybe not engaging in the news coverage of things like Black Lives Matter or the climate strikes the way June would be. Someone else asked, and this is a question that I think is interesting to talk about, like, how did knowing the results of the election impact your portrayal of the characters at all? Or because we started rehearsals, for people who don't know, we started rehearsals a few weeks before the election. It happened. We kind of knew we thought we knew what was going to happen, but did you learn anything in watching the election that shaped your portrayal of the characters?
I'm going to just
sure.
first, John, if that's okay, because this is something that we talked about between us. And when we were waiting for the results, and it took so many days, right? And I, as Cindy, while I was waiting for the results of the election, I had this underlying current of anxiety, like waiting on tenterhooks to find out what was going to happen, and dreading the thought that if Trump were to win, but not feeling confident that he might not. It was just really. So I thought to myself, wow, as someone in Canada, like this is really impacting me. So imagine how you would be feeling if you were an American, and especially if you were June, wondering, are we going to have another 4 years with this man? And so it made me more vehement in my my stance on how I felt about the things that she believed as the election was going on.
John, did you have any?
Well, I've kind of forgotten the question, but it's sort of like,
Did the election impact
did
your portrayal, like the results?
No, not at all. No, I wouldn't say at all. I mean, I basically, I don't think I don't think Fred changed
right
before or after the election, because he's pretty simple. He knows what, I mean, there's issues. This is what it is.
Yeah.
Whatever. Like, I mean, he would have preferred to see Trump be elected, but it didn't happen.
Something that,
or maybe it hasn't happened yet, although
right.
I don't know what he's thinking. I don't know whether Fred now is thinking that there's still a chance, or I kind of don't think he is.
No.
But no, it didn't change my portrayal at all.
Something I found just as a director and watching the election play out with this play too, is this notion that there are a lot of Trump supporters, people who voted for Trump, that didn't necessarily make themselves known before the election. Like the polls, I don't think were entirely representative of the voting public. And I think Fred sort of mentions that a little bit, like, I don't normally go around blasting my politics. I'm only really telling you because you asked. But I think that, there were a lot of people, and Fred is one of them, that I don't think the polls necessarily could have accounted for.
No, I agree.
Yeah. So one more question, I think, and then we'll probably wrap this up. So it talks about Fred's focus on the problem, and that is the economy. That's Fred's primary issue in terms of why he votes for what he does. And so, Cindy, June, she doesn't really, how do you think she responds to that issue of the economy? Obviously, she voices her concern for other reasons why not to vote for Trump.
Mm-hmm.
But what do you think, like, we sort of touched on this a little bit, but she's obviously not very in tune with the economic hardships in the Rust Belt, like in places like Ohio. Like, what do you think she makes of that argument? And would she have a solution to that? Like, is there a reason you should vote for Biden for those reasons?
Well, I think she thinks he's selfish, because all he's concerned about primarily is the situation for himself and his family. And I say all he's concerned about. But from Fred's perspective, that's all there is.
Right.
Right. He's lost his job at the plant after 40, however many years he worked there. And now he's working at a Home Depot, a new place that's just opened up, hoping things are going to go okay. He's finally got a health plan again. Right. But he probably is like, it's like clinging by a thread, and that's all that matters to him. So June perceives that as self-centered and not getting the big picture and all of the things that are happening in our country. And what about the people that don't have jobs at Home Depot that are in your community, right?
Right.
Well, Trump's not going to take care of them. They need Obamacare, or they need, the health care or whatever that Biden is proposing. But I think her view of Fred's opinion on the economy is she doesn't respect it.
Right.
But she doesn't understand it either.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the problem. I think she doesn't get it. So she's living that's the problem a lot of times, right? Like, I mean, it's really hard for us to really understand what other people are experiencing. It's hard for us to understand what the the challenges of people with color. Because I mean, it's like, oh well, we're not a racist. Canada's not racist. You talk to people of color or immigrant people, whatever, and they'll tell you their experiences are quite different than what we might perceive if we're not in that environment. So I think June, she's living in a bubble in New York that's quite different, and she doesn't get what it's really like to be Fred. And so, I mean, you said he's kind of selfish or self-centered, but gosh, like, what's it like to live in that? Like it's easy for someone to be more theoretical or think about things in a broader sense if you don't have to worry about putting food on the table or, like.
Yep.
So I think I think it's really something that we should all be thinking about, is like we can't really put ourselves in someone else's place. We're not experiencing somebody else, so we have to realize that sometimes their opinions and their voting behavior and some of that stuff is geared on stuff that we just don't understand because we're not living that life. And that's what I liked about doing this Fred thing. I mean, I kind of like Fred, actually.
Good. Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in and asking those questions. I think that we'll call it a night at this point. I want to thank our cast, Cindy Chappell, who played June, John Geddes was Fred. Thank you very much, you two, for bringing these two characters to life. Thank you again, everyone, for who tuned in. We're going to leave the live stream up on YouTube until Sunday night at around midnight. So you have about 48 hours left to go back and watch it again, share with your friends and family. And thank you all for engaging in this really important discussion. And I think everyone seems to be in agreement that we all need to work a little harder to be more understanding of everyone, not just focusing on people who have the exact same beliefs and opinions as we do. So thank you both. Thank you, everyone who tuned in all over YouTube land, and stay tuned. John,
let me say
ahead.
thank you, Dylan.
Oh,
I mean,
thank you.
Dylan wrote this, and it's been thought-provoking to participate in it, and I've got to congratulate you on putting these two characters together and being able to express these two different points of view and giving us a lot of food for thought here.
Thank you.
It certainly prompted lots of conversations amongst us.
Yeah, no, it's been a really fun experience doing this. So stay tuned, because I'm hoping that we can do something like this again in the new year with these characters, maybe. Not sure exactly what form that'll take, but I think that these are conversations that are going to continue well into 2021. So thank you, everyone, and have a great night.